Welcome to Cheater's Diary. Let's get started on today's story. Michael, a 42-year-old successful businessman, has built a seemingly perfect life. Married for 15 years to his beautiful and loving wife Linda, they have 2 children, David, 14, and Michelle, 10. Their love story is the envy of many, with Michael working tirelessly to provide a good life for his family. From the outside looking in, Michael and Linda had the ideal marriage. They were the couple everyone admired, the definition of stability and love. Michael, a highly respected financial consultant, had climbed the corporate ladder with sheer dedication and hard work. He provided his family with a life of comfort, ensuring they never lacked anything. Their home, a beautiful 5-bedroom duplex in one of Lagos' affluent neighborhoods, was a testament to his success. He had always envisioned a future where his children would grow up with every advantage he never had as a child. Linda, on the other hand, played her role flawlessly. She was the epitome of grace and elegance, always well-dressed, always poised, and always ready with a smile. She had dedicated herself to being a homemaker, taking care of the children while also engaging in charity work. To Michael, she was the ideal wife, loyal, kind, and supportive. He often boasted to his friends that he had found a rare gem, a woman who complimented him in every way. His colleagues, most of whom struggled with marital issues, envied him. But perfection is often an illusion. Michael never questioned Linda's actions. She was always warm and affectionate, always available when he needed her. Even when she started becoming more engaged in her charity work and spending longer hours outside the home, he never doubted her intentions. She had a good heart, he thought. He admired her passion for helping others. He was proud to have a wife who wasn't just about material things but wanted to make a difference in people's lives. However, beneath the surface, cracks in their marriage went unnoticed by him. There were little things that Michael should have caught, things that in hindsight seemed so obvious. The sudden late-night calls she dismissed as wrong numbers, the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when he entered the room, the way she sometimes seemed distant even when they were together. But he always brushed them aside. After all, they had been together for 15 years. Trust was the foundation of their marriage. Why would he suspect anything? The children adored their mother, and she was always attentive to them. She never failed to attend school meetings, always made sure their homework was done, and was actively involved in their extracurricular activities. Linda was the kind of mother every child wished for, and Michael was grateful that his children had someone so loving to care for them. But there were signs that he was too blinded by love to see. Linda had started taking more interest in her appearance than usual. Not that she was ever careless, but there was something different. She was more meticulous about her makeup, more selective with her clothes, and she spent an unusual amount of time on her phone, social media most especially. There were also the unexplained absences, moments when she was unreachable, claiming she had network issues or that she had left her phone in the car. Michael had noticed but had chosen to ignore it. He reassured himself that he was just being paranoid. After all, Linda had given him no reason to doubt her. He loved her. He trusted her. But trust, as he would soon learn, could be a dangerous thing. Then came the nights when she would return home late, smelling faintly of cologne that was not his. He would ask about it playfully, and she would laugh it off, saying she had been around people at her charity events. He would accept the explanation because why wouldn't he? She was his wife, the mother of his children. She wouldn't lie to him, but the lies were already woven into the fabric of their marriage. The betrayal had begun long before he even suspected anything, and soon the illusion of perfection would shatter into pieces, leaving Michael to pick up the fragments of his broken life. Michael starts feeling unwell, a persistent fever, body aches, and unusual discomfort. At first, he assumes it's just exhaustion. After all, his workload has been overwhelming lately, and stress often takes a toll on his health. But as the symptoms persist, he grows concerned. One evening, after yet another restless night, he decides to visit the hospital. The doctor conducts routine tests and tells him to return the next day for results. Michael isn't worried, at least not yet. He expects the doctor to advise him on rest and maybe some vitamins. When he walks into the clinic the next day, he is unprepared for the news that awaits him. "Mr. Michael," the doctor begins, hesitating slightly, "I have your results. You tested positive for an STD." Michael freezes, his mind struggling to process the words. "That's not possible," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. "There must be a mistake." The doctor shakes his head sympathetically. "I understand this is shocking, but the results are conclusive. Have you had unprotected sex outside your marriage?" The question stings. "Never," Michael answers firmly. "I have only been with my wife." A heavy silence fills the room. The implications of the diagnosis settle in his mind like a lead weight. If you enjoying this story, kindly hit the like button and subscribe for more. When he gets home, he barely hears the greetings from his children. He walks straight to the bedroom where Linda is seated on the bed, scrolling through her phone. He stares at her, his heart pounding. "Linda, we need to talk." She looks up, her expression neutral. "What is it?" "I went to the hospital today." Her face doesn't change. "And?" Michael swallows hard. "I tested positive for an STD." For a moment, there is only silence. Then, to his shock, Linda scoffs. "Are you accusing me of something?" He blinks. "Linda, I have only been with you. How do you explain this?" Her expression shifts from disbelief to anger. "So, now you think I'm unfaithful? Maybe you should check yourself first. How do I know you haven't been sneaking around?" Michael stares at her, stunned. He expected denial, maybe even tears, but not this. Not an attack. The way she turns the accusation back on him makes his blood run cold. Something is very, very wrong. Determined to find the truth, he hires a private investigator. Days later, he receives the report, and what he reads shatters his world. Linda has been having an affair for over a decade, with an old family friend, Charles, whom Michael had always trusted. The investigator suggests an even more devastating possibility. David and Michelle might not be Michael's biological children. Michael grips the report, his vision blurring with unshed tears. His entire life, his family, his love, it has all been a lie. The tension between Michael and Linda had been building for months, with Michael feeling an inexplicable distance between them. His once unwavering trust in her now seemed to be eroding slowly, like the steady, unforgiving flow of a river carving into the earth. He tried to ignore the signs, the hushed conversations, the late-night glances, the way Linda had distanced herself emotionally. But deep down, a nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Despite his suspicions, Michael refused to believe it. He couldn't. The idea of Linda betraying him, of their children not being his, was too much to bear. He'd always worked long hours, trying to provide the best life he could for his family, often thinking that his dedication to his career was a noble sacrifice for their future. But now, as he sat alone in his study one fateful night, the harsh reality of his situation began to sink in. In an act of desperate self-preservation, Michael made a decision he never thought he would. He would conduct a paternity test, though the thought of it made his stomach churn with anxiety. The test results arrived quietly, almost too quietly, like the calm before a storm. Michael stared at the envelope in his hands, his heart racing in his chest. With trembling hands, he tore it open and read the words that would forever alter his life. He was not the father of either child. His world, once so solid and secure, began to crumble into dust. How could this be? Michael asked himself. He'd raised them, loved them with every ounce of his being. He had been their father in every sense but biology. How could it all be a lie? He'd been so blind, so consumed by his work that he never once questioned the loyalty of the woman he loved. And yet, in this single moment, all his certainties vanished. The children he had raised with tenderness, the family he had carefully built, were nothing but an illusion. Rage and sorrow surged through him in an unholy wave. His blood boiled as he approached Linda that night. His voice was steady but cold, like the calm before an emotional tempest. "I know," he said. I know everything." Linda's face drained of color as she met his gaze. The walls of their once perfect home felt suffocating, as if the air had thickened and was closing in on her. She tried to deny it, but Michael's cold, unwavering stare shattered her defenses. With a reluctant sigh, Linda collapsed into the sofa, her hands trembling in her lap. She could no longer pretend. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said, her voice thick with guilt and shame. "I never meant for it to happen. But you were never there. You worked all the time, Michael. All I wanted was someone to talk to, someone to share my life with. I felt so alone." And then Charles was there. The name struck Michael like a physical blow. Charles, the man who had been his friend, the man he had trusted. Michael had always been too busy to see the subtle cracks forming in his marriage, too absorbed in his career to notice the growing affection between Linda and Charles. "I didn't want this," Linda continued, her eyes brimming with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you, but Charles was everything I needed. He made me feel seen, made me feel loved. You were always gone. And when I needed you most, you weren't there." The words felt like knives to Michael's chest. He had sacrificed everything for his family, believing that his long hours and tireless work would keep them safe, would give them the best life. And yet, it had all been in vain. The children, the house, the quiet moments he had cherished, all of it had been a mirage. The weight of his betrayal was suffocating. But even as his heart shattered into a million pieces, a conflicting emotion stirred within him. He looked at the children, his children, or so he had thought. He had raised them, loved them as though they were his own blood. Their smiles, their laughter, the bond he had formed with them. How could he simply walk away from all of that? Despite the burning anger in his chest, despite the overwhelming sense of betrayal, the love he felt for them still lingered like a faint, flickering flame in the depths of his soul. Michael's mind raced, torn between the raw emotions coursing through him and the undeniable truth before him. These children, who had once been the center of his universe, were not his. The realization left him feeling hollow, a shell of the man he once was. His life, his identity, had been built on a foundation of lies. But the love he felt for the children who had called him Dad for so many years refused to be extinguished, no matter how much pain it caused him. The question that haunted him now was, what should he do? Should he confront the reality that everything he had known was a lie and sever all ties, leaving the children behind as mere strangers? Or should he continue to love them, knowing that his role as their father had never truly been his to claim? Linda, sitting across from him, could see the turmoil in his eyes. She had broken him, shattered the very foundation of their lives. But in her desperation for love and affection, she too had destroyed herself. Her betrayal had cost them everything. And as she looked at Michael, she realized that nothing she could say or do would ever make up for the devastation she had caused. The love they once shared had been poisoned, and now it was too late to undo the damage. The room was thick with silence, the air heavy with the weight of betrayal. Michael, still struggling to make sense of the pain flooding his heart, took one last, long look at Linda. She had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and yet, she too was broken. In that moment, he realized that they were both victims of circumstances beyond their control. Him, the betrayed. Her, the betrayer. But what did that leave for him now? The truth, as agonizing as it was, had shattered everything. Yet, deep within him, he still felt the faint stirrings of the love he had for his children, the ones who had never known the truth. What happens now? Michael wondered. How would he move forward from this point of no return, knowing that his love for those children might be the only thing left worth fighting for? In the agony of his truth, Michael knew that no matter what decision he made, it would haunt him for the rest of his life. The decision to file for divorce had been one of the hardest Michael had ever made. Every instinct in his body told him to fight for the family he thought he had built, to somehow salvage the wreckage of his life and rebuild. But the betrayal was too deep, the truth too painful. He knew he could never look at Linda the same way again, and worse, the children, his children, or at least the ones he had believed were his, would forever be a reminder of the lie. They, too, would have to face the consequences of their mother's actions. When the papers were served, Linda's reaction wasn't one of remorse or sorrow. Instead, she seemed determined to hold on to the life Michael had provided her, unwilling to let go of the comfortable existence that had come with being his wife. She fought back with a vengeance, seeking not just alimony, but also full custody of the children. The fact that Michael wasn't the biological father was irrelevant in her mind. She had played the role of a devoted wife for 15 years, and now she was ready to protect that image with everything she had. The legal battle became an ugly spectacle. Lawyers argued over finances, custody arrangements, and visitation rights. Linda's team painted Michael as a broken man, someone who had neglected his family for his career and had failed in his most basic duty, being present. They portrayed her as a loving mother who had endured the loneliness of a marriage in which her husband was physically absent, yet emotionally distant. She was the victim, they argued, trapped in a marriage that had failed through no fault of her own, and now she had the right to preserve the life she had grown accustomed to. Michael's team, however, fought back with their own version of events. They brought up Linda's affair with Charles, the paternity test results, and the deception she had carried out for years. But the more the case went on, the more Michael found himself drowning in the constant waves of accusations, questions, and the endless media scrutiny. The public was fascinated by the drama, and Michael, once a proud, self-assured man, was now the subject of gossip and pity. He became a spectacle for everyone to dissect. His pain, his heartbreak, his confusion, laid bare for the world to see. The children, meanwhile, were caught in the crossfire. They had no idea of the full truth. To them, their world was still intact, their mother still the center of their universe. But Michael could see the cracks starting to show. They asked strange questions, like why their parents were always fighting or why their mother was suddenly so upset. He wanted to tell them everything, the truth about Linda, about Charles, about the lie they had all been living. But what good would it do? They were too young, too innocent, and their world would never be the same once that truth was revealed. Every day was a battle for Michael. He had lost everything that had ever mattered to him, his marriage, his children's trust, his sense of self. He no longer recognized the man in the mirror, a hollow version of the confident person he once was. Depression set in, creeping over him like a shadow that followed him wherever he went. He questioned his worth, his decisions, and whether he would ever be able to rebuild his life. The loneliness that had once been a distant feeling now consumed him, gnawing at his soul. The burden of public shame, coupled with the heartbreak of betrayal, was unbearable. Family and friends, once a strong support system, became fractured as they took sides in the battle. Some stood by him, offering sympathy, but others, those who had always adored Linda, began to see her as the wronged party. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and Michael found himself isolated. His colleagues at work, once supportive and eager to engage with him on business matters, began to pull away. His focus had faltered in the wake of the divorce and the emotional turmoil. His professional life, once thriving, began to slip through his fingers like sand. He missed meetings, failed to meet deadlines, and his performance at work began to suffer. The once vibrant businessman was now a shell of his former self. He had lost not just his family, but his drive, his ambition, and his sense of purpose. The financial stress of the ongoing legal battle, combined with the loss of focus at work, threatened to ruin him in every way. He was teetering on the edge, and no one seemed to notice the depths of his despair. But then, in the darkest corner of his life, Michael found a flicker of light. Eric, his closest friend, had been there for him since childhood. He had witnessed Michael's rise to success and had been there through every high and low. Tunde knew Michael better than anyone, and he could see the spiral his friend was in. One evening, after Michael had broken down in a tearful phone call, Tunde made a bold decision. He wouldn't let his friend drown in self-pity or succumb to the weight of his failures. The next day, Eric showed up at Michael's apartment unannounced. "Enough is enough, Michael," he said. his voice firm, yet filled with compassion. "You're not the man I know. You're better than this." Michael was too exhausted to argue, but Eric didn't give him the chance. He dragged Michael out of the house, away from the weight of the divorce papers, the harsh words, and the constant pressure. They went for a long walk, talking about anything but the mess Michael had found himself in. Eric didn't push him to open up about his pain, but instead focused on getting Michael back to a place where he could see the future ahead of him. "Look, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it's going to be quick," Eric said as they sat down at a small cafe. "But you can't let Linda win. You can't let anyone win by seeing you as weak, as broken. The truth is, you still have control over your future. You've been through worse. This isn't the end of the world. It's just the end of a chapter, and you have the power to start the next one." The words hit Michael like a jolt of electricity. He hadn't realized just how much he had lost himself in the pain. Eric reminded him of the man he used to be, the man who could overcome anything, who could rise above challenges, who could be the master of his own fate. Slowly, over the next few weeks, Eric became his anchor, guiding him through the storm. Michael began to rebuild, bit by bit. His focus at work sharpened again, his resolve strengthened, and he started taking the necessary steps to reclaim his life. The divorce was still ongoing, but Michael no longer let it define him. He started working on his own emotional recovery, seeking therapy, and reconnecting with parts of himself that had been buried under the weight of betrayal. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the pain of losing his family would never truly go away. But with Eric's support and his own newfound determination, Michael began to fight for his future, one that was not defined by his past mistakes, but by his strength to rise again. In the ashes of his former life, Michael found the seeds of something new, a chance to rebuild, to grow, and to redefine his purpose on his own terms. And for the first time in a long while, he believed that there could be a future worth fighting for. The battle for custody had been long and grueling. Michael had spent months in the courtroom, fighting not just for his right to be part of his children's lives, but for his own sense of dignity. It felt like an endless storm, one that tested his resolve at every turn. And yet, despite the emotional toll, despite the shame and the pain of the past, Michael came out victorious. The court ruled in his favor, granting him full custody of David and Michelle. It was a bittersweet victory, one that came at the cost of his trust in those he had loved most. But Michael knew deep down that his victory was not just about legal papers or financial settlements. It was about something more profound. The children, despite everything, had been innocent in all of this. They were not responsible for Linda's betrayal or for Charles's absence. They had grown up in a world that had been built on lies, but they were not to blame. And so, Michael made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He refused to walk away from them, not just as their father, but as their protector, their guide. He had raised them with love, and now, despite knowing they were not his biological children, he chose to remain in their lives, to be the father figure they so desperately needed. David and Michelle, though confused by the shifting tides of their world, clung to him as they always had. The bond they shared was not forged by blood, but by the countless moments of love, laughter, and shared experiences. Michael had been there for them when they had scraped their knees, when they had celebrated victories and suffered defeats. And though the truth had altered everything, it didn't change the fact that he had been their father in every way that mattered. Linda, on the other hand, was left with little. Her betrayal had been exposed for the world to see. The truth about her affair with Charles, the lies she had told, the manipulations she had used to secure her comfortable life, all of it came crashing down around her. The support she had once enjoyed from friends and family began to dwindle as her actions became widely known. Those who had once rallied around her now distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the reality of her betrayal. The community that had once viewed her as a devoted mother and wife now saw her for what she truly was, a woman who had torn apart her family for her own selfish desires. And then there was Charles. The man who had been the catalyst for this entire mess. The man who had stepped into Michael's life with the promise of being a friend, only to betray him in the worst way possible. When Linda's affair was revealed, Charles vanished. He couldn't handle the pressure of the situation, couldn't face the consequences of his actions. He disappeared from their lives, leaving Linda in a state of disgrace. Alone, with no one left to lean on, Linda was forced to reckon with the full extent of the damage she had caused. The family she had once fought so hard to preserve was now in ruins, and she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered existence. As for Michael, the scars of betrayal ran deep, but they no longer defined him. The emotional wounds that had once threatened to consume him were now part of his past, not his present. Through therapy, he had begun to heal, to come to terms with the overwhelming betrayal and the complex emotions it had stirred within him. The therapy was not an easy journey, but it was necessary. Michael learned to confront his pain, to accept his vulnerability, and to forgive both Linda and himself. It was in these moments of self-reflection that he discovered the true meaning of strength, not in the ability to avoid pain, but in the courage to face it and rise above it. With a clearer mind and a stronger heart, Michael refocused on his business. The same determination that had once fueled his professional success returned with a new purpose. He didn't just want to rebuild his life for himself, he wanted to use his experiences to help others. In time, Michael opened a foundation dedicated to supporting men who had faced similar betrayals. He knew firsthand the pain and isolation that came with being deceived, and he was determined to create a space where men could heal, share their stories, and find the strength to move forward. The foundation became a beacon of hope for those who had lost their way, and in helping others, Michael found healing for himself. Years passed, and Michael stood in front of David and Michelle one evening, watching them play in the backyard. They were no longer the young children who had once clung to him with innocent trust, but teenagers with their own dreams, their own futures. The years had been hard, but they had been worth it. He had weathered the storm, rebuilt his life, and now, with his children by his side, he knew the truth. Family, he realized, was not defined by blood alone. It was about love. It was about sacrifice. It was about resilience in the face of the most insurmountable odds. Michael had learned that the true measure of family was in the depth of the bonds we choose to create, not the circumstances of our birth. The love he had given to David and Michelle, the love he had received from them, was a testament to the power of choice. Despite the heartache and betrayal, he had chosen them, and in doing so, he had found his redemption. As he watched them laughing together, their faces lit by the setting sun, Michael knew that he had done the right thing. The road to redemption had been long, but it had led him to a place of peace, a place where he could finally see that despite the pain of the past, he had built something far more meaningful than he had ever imagined. He had built a family, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. The years had passed, but the lessons they had taught him remained etched in his heart, like a scar that, though faded, would never completely disappear. Michael stood by the window of his home, watching David and Michelle from a distance as they moved through the world with a sense of purpose and responsibility. They were no longer the children he had raised out of love and obligation, but young adults carving their own paths, each with dreams and ambitions of their own. They had grown into thoughtful, resilient individuals, and in many ways, they had come to embody the very qualities that Michael had hoped to instill in them. David, with his sharp mind and quiet strength, was preparing to graduate from college, while Michelle, confident and compassionate, had started working at a local nonprofit. They had both taken the best of what Michael had to offer, and though the scars of their past would always be part of their story, they had never allowed them to define their future. They were more than just survivors. They were thriving. Michael's eyes followed them as they sat outside on the porch, laughing together, a simple moment of shared joy. His heart swelled with pride and a deep sense of fulfillment. He had chosen to be their father, to stay in their lives when it would have been easier to walk away. And now, watching them, he knew that every sacrifice, every moment of pain, had been worth it. But the journey had not been easy. Michael had spent years learning to forgive, first Linda and then himself. He had learned that strength was not found in the absence of pain, but in the ability to rise after the fall, to stand tall despite the weight of betrayal, and to keep moving forward. He had been knocked down more times than he could count, but each time he had picked himself up, piece by piece, until he became a man who could look his past in the eye and walk away from it without regret. The scars of betrayal still lingered, of course. They always would. But they no longer controlled him. They were part of his story, but they did not define him. He had healed, not through time alone, but through the decision to rise above the darkness, to embrace the light of love and redemption. The pain had taught him invaluable lessons about himself, about the nature of forgiveness, and about the power of love that transcended blood. Turning away from the window, Michael made his way outside, joining David and Michelle on the porch. The evening air was cool, and the setting sun cast a warm, golden hue over the landscape. They smiled at him as he approached, their eyes filled with love and understanding. There was no need for words. They had all come so far, and in this moment they were simply a family, one that had been forged not by fate or circumstance but by choice, by love, and by the unbreakable bond they had created. As Michael sat down between them, David nudged him playfully. "Hey, Dad, we were just talking about what comes next for all of us. What's your plan?" Michael chuckled softly, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the pressure of uncertainty, the fear of what might come. He had walked through the fire and emerged stronger, wiser, and more at peace than he had ever been before. "I think," Michael said slowly, his voice steady and full of conviction, "the plan is to keep moving forward, to keep growing, to be the best version of myself, for you two, for me, for all of us." David nodded thoughtfully, a grin spreading across his face. "Sounds like a good plan, Dad." Michelle leaned over and placed her hand on his. "You've already done more than enough, Michael. You've shown us what it means to be strong, to love even when it's hard." Michael's heart swelled with gratitude. He looked at the two young adults beside him, his children, his family, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of true peace. The road ahead was unknown, but he was no longer afraid of it. Whatever came next, he was ready. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Michael stood up, his gaze fixed on the future. There were still many chapters left to be written, but for the first time he was no longer running from his past. He had embraced it, learned from it, and found a way to move forward with grace. And as he walked away from the memories of betrayal, he embraced the new beginning that lay before him. A future built on love, resilience, and the unwavering belief that family was not just about blood, but about the bonds we choose to create. With a deep breath, Michael took the first step into the future, his heart full of hope, his mind clear with the wisdom of a man who had learned that true strength was not in avoiding the storm, but in rising after it. The end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, kindly hit the like button and subscribe for more.